Hello and welcome to the second episode in the series, Box Store Commander Challenge. So if you're interested in seeing the premise behind this series, then check out episode 0. So today what I'm going to look at is the actual deck. For the initial sort of setup videos, episode 0 and 1, I did ask people to post comments and people have very kindly done that. And one of the things that was requested to look at is an analysis of the deck. So we're starting off with Nature of the Beast is our deck that we're going to use for this particular exercise. So in this episode I'm going to go down and just go through the whole deck, breaking it down into chunks so we can see how the deck holds together. So first off I'm going to look at the mana base. I'm going to look at my land. What do I have access to? What sort of utility and interaction does this land give me? So I've divided this into broadly 5 categories of land. In the first category I have along the top here my basic lands and also additional cards that interact in some way with that particular type of land. Then I have a group of lands which can also cycle, and we'll come on to that in a moment. A group of lands which will generate 2 colours, a group of lands which will generate other colours and also colourless in a certain amount, and finally what I would call utility lands. So they have extra utility on them above any generation of colours of mana. So looking first at the basic lands, you can see we have 5 mountains, 8 forests and 4 plains. In addition to that we have a couple of lands that allow us to fetch out, to hunt down basic land cards. So first up we have Evolving Wilds. You can tap it, sacrifice it and search your library for a basic land card and then put that card onto the battlefield, tapped, and then you shuffle your library. Naya Panorama does a very similar thing, but in addition, a couple of things. It can also be used to tap for colourless mana, and the sort of sacrifice and go down and hunt basic land cards is conditional in that you also have to use 1 colourless mana to activate that ability, and it is specific about which basic lands it searches down, in this case mountains, forests and plains. Now in a deck where they're the only 3 types of basic lands that isn't a problem, but just so you know that it's specifically to the basic lands in this deck. Now one thing to note as well, it does specifically say for a basic mountain, forest or plains. There aren't any in the deck at the moment, but obviously if you had any non-basic lands which did have the land type of mountain, forest and plains on it, and this does happen in the case of certain dual lands, sort of dual colour lands, then that card wouldn't be able to use to fetch those. But it's not an issue here, and if it does become one when we pull a land of that category, if that ever happens, then I'll sort of explain about that, and we might need to make changes to the mana base to better interact with that card. Moving on to the cycling lands, all 6 of these, in addition to generating mana of their certain colour, can also cycle. So what a cycle is where you discard the card and you draw a card. Now the circumstances in which you would use that is if in effect that particular card is redundant. You don't need it to be generating mana, so you basically use pay its cycling cost to draw a card that may be of more use to you. There are 2 of each of the 3 colours, and each one of these in the column is subtly different. So in the first column for each colour we have a cycling land which will, in addition to generating its chosen colour, for the cost of the same colour, you can cycle it. In the other column, all of these, again, they generate a particular colour of mana, red, green, white. But with these, the cycling cost is 2 colourless. So a different cycling cost. And we move on to the 2 colour lands. So we have a couple of each type for red, white and green, white, but only one for that red-green combination. So the difference between these two in the case of red, white is that the Boros Guild Gate enters the battlefield tapped, and you can tap it to add red or white mana to your mana pool. And it's the same as the Selesnya Guild Gate, does the same thing, but for green, white. Looking over at the Boros Garrison, however, you'll see that, if this is clear enough, when it enters the battlefield, you have to return a land that you control to its owner's hand. So you're effectively bouncing a land when this comes into play. Now the other thing about this is you can actually bounce the land itself. So when you play the Boros Guild Gate, if it enters the battlefield, you can actually choose to return that same card back into your hand. Now I'll explain where that might be useful in a moment. But you'll see that the Selesnya Sanctuary is essentially the same card but for the green-white combination. Now what happens here as well is when you're tapping it to generate mana, it adds both, in this case, in the case of the Boros one, red-white, and in the case of Selesnya, green-white. It adds both of those both of those colours of mana to your mana pool. Now I was talking about effectively bouncing lands here. There's some interesting interactions that you can use here. If the deck, when we come to look at it, and we see that there's a number of landfall cards here where they're triggered when land enters the battlefield, you can actually trigger that landfall ability and actually bounce the land just to trigger that landfall ability. If you don't want to bounce another card, or you don't want to bounce another land, you can actually just self-bounce the card, which will then trigger any landfall abilities in play. Also, you can use the bounce on here to return another land that maybe has an enter the battlefield ability on it, and recast it like your next opportunity to play a land. So that's something else to bear in mind. And as I said down here, we have a single Gruul Guild Gate, so that taps for red or green. It's not a bounce land. And again, if we felt that we wanted the red-green bounce land, then we would have to find somewhere finding the same one in Gruul as these are. Now we have cards which generate different colours of mana. We've got Rupture Spire, which enters the battlefield tapped. When it enters the battlefield, you have to play one colourless or sacrifice it, but you get to tap this for mana of any colour. Vivid Crag taps for red. It does enter the battlefield tapped with 2 charge counters on it, but as an alternative for tapping red, you can tap it, remove a charge counter from Vivid Crag, and add 1 mana of any colour to your mana pool. Now, it's interesting to note you could have an interaction going on there if you wanted to effectively recharge that Vivid Crag by using a bounce land to do that if you wanted to, if that was, you know, a reasonable use of that, if that was relevant to that particular time in the game where you would want to recharge your Vivid Crag. You could do that using basically bouncing it out back into your hand. Opal Palace adds 1 colourless to your mana pool, but for a cost of 1 colourless you can tap it, add 1 mana of any colour to your mana pool, or to your of your commander's colour identity. But also when you do that, if that's mana that's spent on casting your commander, the commander will enter the battlefield with a number of +1/+1 counters on it equal to the number of times it's been cast from the command zone in the game. Then we move on to command tower. That can be tapped to add colour to the mana pool of any colour in your commander's colour identity. And Temple of the False God is tapped to add 2 colourless mana to your mana pool, and it can only be activated if you control 5 or more lands. So that's a sort of late game acceleration of colourless mana. And then we've got Jungle Shrine, and this one enters the battlefield tapped, but it can tap for red, green or white, so all 3 of the colours, whichever one you want to choose there. And we'll move on to the utility lands. So we've got Kalani Garden, that enters the battlefield tapped. It taps for green mana, but it's got this interesting ability. When it enters the battlefield, you put a 0/1 green plant creature token onto the battlefield. Now, of course, you could also bounce that card back into your hand using one of the bounce lands and effectively recast that later on if you wanted to. Vitu Ghazi, the city tree, that taps for 1 colourless, but for 2 colourless green-white, you can tap it and put a 1/1 green saproling creature token onto the battlefield. So that one can be sort of used again and again and again, as long as you've got the right enough mana and the right mana to basically be able to keep generating those 1/1 green sapling creature tokens. So again, in the deck, what we're looking for is anything that might pump those tokens up. And of course, any of the tokens like that, the small ones, they can be used effectively as chump blockers. You can also, with Contested Cliffs, that taps for 1 colourless as well. But in addition, for a cost of red-green, you can tap it, and a target beast creature you control fights the target creature an opponent controls. So you'll notice when we look at the deck, there's a lot of beasts in the deck. So that synergizes well with that. Homeward Path, tap 1 colourless to your mana pool, so another one that generates colourless mana. Additional ability on here, tap it. Each player gains control of all creatures he or she owns. So it's a great way of getting back any creatures that an opponent has somehow managed to gain control of. Mosswort Bridge has Hideaway on it. So these last 2 lands, basically they mess with your, will allow you to mess with your library. Okay, so if you look down the list here, what we've got is this is tokens. These 2 here basically interact with creatures, and these 2 here basically interact with the top of your library. So Mosswort Bridge has Hideaway on it. So this land enters the battlefield tapped. When it does, look at the top 4 cards of your library, exile 1 face down, then put the rest on the bottom of the library. You can also tap it to add green to your mana pool, so it does generate regular mana. And for green, you can tap it. You may play the exiled card without paying its mana cost if creatures you control have total power 10 or greater. And in a deck where you've got a lot of very large creatures, that's not going to be difficult to achieve that condition. And then finally, we've got New Benalia, and that enters the battlefield tapped. When New Benalia enters the battlefield, you get to scry for 1. So you can look at the top card of your library, and you may put that card on the bottom of your library if you want to. And also it taps for 1 white there. So that's our mana base. So let's move on to another part of the deck. So if we now look at the creatures in the deck, and I've arranged this by mana, by casting cost, we can see that just in overview, there's a number of beasts in the deck. We have also a number of creatures that have cycling on them, and we'll come to what that means on creatures in a moment. We've got quite a large amount of green creatures, and a few multicoloured creatures as well. The colour where there's the least amount of creatures is in white, but we're probably going to see a few more white cards when we have a look at the other types of spells. So in our 3-drop position, this is where our sort of creatures start off. We've got our signature commander, if you like, for the deck, which is Marith, Will of the Wild. We've got Maella the Anima, and we've got Grazing Gladeheart. So the first two are legendary creatures. So in the case of Marith, it comes into play with a number of +1/+1 counters on it, equal to the amount of mana spent to cast it. Now, because commanders can be recast, and every time you recast them, they cost 2 colourless more than the previous time they were cast, then you can see that that ability is going to scale. So when you first cast this, there's going to be 3 counters on there, and then when you cast it, if you had to cast it again, there would be 5, and so on. So you can also, there's an ability below that where you can remove X counters from it for a cost of X colourless, and those counters can be used in a number of different ways. You can actually put X/1/1 counters on a target creature, or you can deal X damage to a target creature or player, or you can put an XX green elemental creature token onto the battlefield. Maella the Anima, in this case, she's a 2/3, and for a cost of 3 colourless red, green, white, you get to tap, look at the top 5 cards of your library, and you may put a creature card with power 5 or greater from among them onto the battlefield. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. You'll also notice within the deck there are references to powers of creatures. We've seen that in the land section, but also some of the other cards we'll look at here references certain powers greater than, say, 5, for instance. Grazing Gladeheart is a 2/2, and that has landfall on it, so whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may gain 2 life. And we spoke about landfall and how bounce lands sort of interact with that ability when we had a look at the land section. Now if we move on to the 4-drops, we can see we've got a number of cards here. We've got a Ravenous Baloth, which is a 4/4, and you can sacrifice a beast, you gain 4 life. We've got Mole Shambler, which is a 3/3, but also has a kicker of 1 and a green. And when that enters the battlefield, if it's been kicked, you get to destroy a target non-creature permanent. Drum Hunter is a 2/2, and at the beginning of your end step, if you control a creature with power 5 or greater, you may draw a card, and also you can tap it for 1 colourless. So you can see there's synergy there with power 5 or greater creatures. Krosan Warchief, beast spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, so you've got synergy there with a large number of beast creatures that are within this deck. And for 1 and a green, you can regenerate a target beast. That's a 2/2. Terra Ravager is a 0/4, and whenever it attacks, it gets +X+0 until end of turn, where X is the number of lands defending player controls. So it's not surprisingly in Commander, with fairly high casting cost generally, you're going to have an opponent that could have quite a considerable amount of land in play. And Spellbreaker Behemoth is a 5/5. It can't be countered, and creature spells that you control with power 5 or greater can't be countered. So once we get beyond this point and beyond, these are all our 5 power creatures and greater. So we've got Gaji the Honoured One, so he's 4/4. Whenever a creature attacks one of your opponents or a planeswalker an opponent controls, that creature gets +2/+0 until end of turn. And Rakeclaw Gargantuan, which is a 5/3, 1 colourless, target creature with power 5 or greater gains first strike until end of turn, so another synergy with 5 or greater creatures, 5 power or greater creatures. Then we move on to the 6-drops, and there's a number of these. So we have Deadwood Treefolk, which is a 3/6, it's got Vanishing 3 on it. So with Vanishing, The permanent enters the battlefield with 3 time counters on it. At the beginning of your upkeep, remove a time counter from it. When the last one is removed, sacrifice it. So Deadwood Treefolk is going to have a limited time on the battlefield from when you cast it to when it finally vanishes. When Deadwood Treefolk enters the battlefield or leaves the battlefield, so when it comes in and when it goes, return another target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. You can see how that's going to get triggered with the vanishing. Baloth Woodcrusher, 4/4, it's got landfall on it. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, Baloth Woodcrusher gets 4/4 and gains trample until end of turn. And with Rampaging Baloths, this is a 6/6 with trample, also has landfall. In this case, whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may put a 4/4 green beast creature token onto the battlefield. So 2 more cards there that are going to obviously interact with your land drops, and you can use various tricks with bounce lands as well on those. We're not on the cards themselves, but by bouncing other lands and basically getting yourself in a position where you can reliably recast lands so you can hit your land drops on each turn is obviously a good thing to have with a landfall deck, and bounce lands are going to help in that. Spike Bellows is a 6/1. When Spike Bellows leaves the battlefield, it deals 6 damage to target creature. Now, to help with that sort of leaving the battlefield trigger, it does have Evoke on it, which is Evoke 1 colourless red, and you can cast this spell for its Evoke cost, but if you do, it's sacrificed when it enters the battlefield. So it leaves the battlefield immediately, so it's a lower casting cost. So what you're getting is for 1 and 2 red, you're getting to do 6 damage to a target creature. For its full casting cost, which is 5 and a red, it's basically a 6/1 creature. Crater Helion has Echo on it. It's a 6/6, but for what happens is with the Echo cost, at the beginning of your upkeep, if this came into your control since the beginning of your last upkeep, sacrifice it unless you pay its Echo cost, which is 4 and 2 red. So obviously to keep it in play, you have to pay that Echo cost in addition to the original casting cost. When it enters the battlefield, it deals 4 damage to each other creature. So you have effectively a mass removal spell for creatures which have 4 toughness or less. Magus of the Arena. So this is a 5/5, and for 3 colourless you can tap it, tap target creature you control and a target creature your opponent controls, and the opponent chooses that creature. Those creatures fight each other, and there was also a fight ability on one of the lands as well, so there's a small fight sub-theme going on here, which is really useful in a deck with large creatures. Valley Rannet, 6/3 with cycling on it, so it's got both mountain cycling and forest cycling, so for a cost of 2 in both instances, and obviously you just choose to activate the appropriate ability as you need it. So you basically discard the card and you search your library for a mountain or forest card, reveal it and put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. Then we're moving on to the 7 drops. We've got Avenger of Zendikar, which is a 5/5, and when that enters the battlefield, you get to put a 0/1 green plant creature token onto the battlefield for each land you control. If you have landfall, so whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may put a +1/+1 counter on each plant creature you control. So the other thing that's important about landfall is getting the timing of playing your land as well. So playing at a point in which you can generate the appropriate landfall. Crozen Tusker, 6/5 with cycling, so another one where for 2 and a green you can discard the card and draw a card. When you cycle Crozen Tusker, you may search your library for a basic land card, reveal that card put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. So you've got land cycling on there, but you get to choose which basic land that you search for. Archangel has a 5/5 with flying and vigilance, and we have Eternal Dragon, which also has flying on it. It's also a 5/5, but it has an extra ability in that for 3 and 2 white, you can return it from your graveyard to your hand, and you can only activate that ability only during your upkeep. But also has plane cycling on it for 2, colourless. So you can discard the card, search your library for a planes card, reveal it and put it into your hand, and shuffle your library. So quite a bit of cycling going on in the deck to just try and again even out things, maybe hunt down certain things at the expense of other things. And then finally in the curve, way up there, 8 drop, we have Naya Soul Beast, which is a 0/0, so somewhere in here we're going to be adding some sort of counters. It's got trample on it, and whenever you cast Naya Soul Beast, each player reveals the top card of his or her library. When Naya Soul Beast enters the battlefield with X 1/1 counters on it, where X is the total converted mana cost of all cards revealed this way. So there we have our creature curve. As we've said, there's a high proportion of beasts here. We've got a number of cards which have cycling on them of some description, number of cards with landfall on them, a number of cards which can simply be played and then will either immediately or later remove themselves from play, and that in turn may trigger another ability when it comes out. We've got a lot of 2-for-1s where when stuff comes into play, if certain things have happened, then certain things get triggered. And we've got some life smoothing going on. So if we're losing a bit of life here and there, we have some cards which will allow us to sort of regain that. So there we have the creatures. So let's move on to the next part of the deck. Moving on to our artifacts. Again, we've got a small number of artifacts here, 6 in total. So starting off with our 1-drop, we have Soul Ring, which is going to tap for 2 colourless. We have Swiftfoot Boots, which is equipment, and that's 2 colourless to cast. And we can equip a creature with that, and the equipped creature has hexproof and haste, and that costs 1 to equip in addition to its casting cost. We have Druidic Satchel in our 3-drop, and for 2 colourless, we tap it, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature card, put a 1/1 green sapling creature token onto the battlefield. If it's a land card, put that card onto the battlefield under your control. If it's a non-creature, non-land card, you gain 2 life. So a number of different things it will do based on the card that you reveal. We've got Behemoth Sledge, which is another piece of equipment. So although this is an artifact, it comes from a set where there were coloured artifacts. So for 1 colourless green-white, it gives an equipped creature +2/+2, and it has lifelink and trample. But remember, there's also the equip cost of 3 as well to pay there. So you basically pay the top cost just obviously to get it into the battlefield, and then the equip cost to attach it to the creature. Tower of Fortunes is 8 colourless, and you can tap it for that cost and you get to draw 4 cards. And then Seer's Sundial has landfall ability on it, so whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 2 colourless if you do draw a card. So we've got some card draw going on here. In this case, it's basically on turn 5, whenever we've been hitting our land drops, we should be able to basically play that, and then on turn 4, and then next turn pay the 2 colourless and get to draw a card, maybe to help us out with card advantage. And the Tower of Fortune is obviously going to kick in a lot later because of that. you know, it's 4 to cast, so same casting cost as Seer Sundial, but it's 8 to actually activate the ability on there. So that's going to happen a lot later in the game. So now moving on to the next. Looking at our enchantments in the deck, and again arranging them by casting cost order, you can see we've got a 2-drop here in the form of Darksteel Mutation, so that enchants a creature, and the enchanted creature is a 0/1 insect artifact creature with indestructible and loses all other abilities. Then we've got 3 curses in the deck, which are in the sort of 3-drop position. So we've got, and all of these enchant a player. So we've got Curse of the Forsaken, that whenever a creature attacks enchanted player, its controller gains 1 life. The Curse of Chaos, whenever a player attacks enchanted creature with 1 or more creatures, that attacking player may discard a card. If the player does, he or she draws a card. And finally, Curse of Predation, whenever a creature attacks enchanted player, put a +1/+1 counter on it. And also in 3 drops, we've got War Cadence. So for X and a red, this turn creatures can't block unless their controller pays X for each blocking creature he or she controls, and that costs 2 and a red to actually cast that. And Fires of Yavimaya, 1 colourless red-green. Creatures you control have haste. Sacrifice Fires of Yavimaya. Target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. So that's pretty useful if you've got that in play and you've got very large creatures coming into play with haste, so they can attack straight away. Then we sort of skip here there is no 4-drop enchantments, so we're moving on to the 5 drops. We've got Mystic Barrier. So when Mystic Barrier enters the battlefield, or at the beginning of your upkeep, choose left or right. Each player may attack only the opponent seated next to him, nearest to him or her, in the last chosen direction, and planeswalkers controlled by that player. Where Ancients Tread, so this is another card that plays on the Power 5 or greater theme. So whenever a creature with Power 5 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, you may have Where Ancients Tread deal 5 damage to target creature or player. And in Witch Hunt, players can't gain life. At the beginning of your upkeep, Witch Hunt deals 4 damage to you. At the beginning of your end step, target opponent chosen at random gains control of Witch Hunt. And in Warstorm Surge, so this is our 6-drop enchantment. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it deals damage equal to its power and to target creature or player. So very useful again when you've got big, powerful creatures. And then Spawning Grounds, which is 8-drop enchantment. And with this you can enchant a land, and the enchanted land has tap. Put a 5/5 green beast creature token with trample onto the battlefield. Obviously very useful in a deck which boasts a lot of beasts, and if there's sort of beast synergy in there, that's going to help. Okay, so moving on to now our sorceries and instants. So finally here are our sorceries and instants we're going to take a look at, again arranged by casting cost. And at the very top end there, I've got the X spells just tacked on the end there, so we can just focus on those as well. Starting off with our 2 drops, you'll see as we go through this, there's obviously, being in green, we've got a good deal of mana accelerant going on. So with Restore, for 1 in the green, you get to put a target land card from your graveyard into your battlefield under your control. We've got a Boros Charm in here, so red-white. This is instant speed. We get to choose 1, so we can deal 4 damage to a target player, or permanents we control gain indestructible until end of turn, or target creature gains double strike until end of turn. Very useful if you've got an attacking creature, big creature. Stick double strike on it. If it's not being blocked or it's unblockable, it's basically going to got something like an 8/8 or a 6/6. A 6/6 will do 12 damage. 8/8 will do 16 damage with double strike on it. Hull Breach, red-green. So we get sorcery speed. This one we get to choose 1. Destroy target artifact or destroy target enchantment, or destroy target artifact and target enchantment. Then moving on to our 3 drops, Sprouting Vines. Another accelerant, we've got search your library for a basic land card, reveal that card and put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. I'm saying an accelerant, it's more of a sort of hunting down a land card because it doesn't put it into play. But you have to remember this, it has Storm on it. So whenever you cast this spell, a copy is made for each spell you cast before that's where spells have happened on that turn. So it's a good way if you've cast other spells, being able to cast this, and you're basically finding land and restocking your hand with land, so that you can make your drops, make your land drops on subsequent turns. Cultivate. This will directly put lands into the battlefield. So search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, reveal the cards and put one into the battlefield tapped and the other into your hand, and shuffle your library. Fiery Justice, red, green, white, sorcery speed. Fiery Justice deals 5 damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures and or players, and target opponent gains 5 life. Good way of dealing with a threat basically, or an interesting way of, let me just take the reading on that. Fiery Justice deals 5 damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures and or players. Target opponent gains 5 life. So you could cast it on one of your own creatures in the knowledge that you won't kill it if it has more than 5 toughness, and actually use it to gain 5 life. Naya Charm, red, green, white. So you get to choose one. It's instant speed. Naya Charm deals 3 damage to target creature, or return a target creature from a graveyard to its owner's hand, or tap all creatures target player controls. So we've got lots of interesting utility going on here in terms of sort of getting creatures back and dealing with permanence. Tempt with Discovery, 3 and a green. It's got Tempting Offer on it. Search your library for a land card and put it onto the battlefield. Each opponent may search his or her library for a land card and put it onto the battlefield. For each opponent who searches a library this way, search your library for a land card and put it onto the battlefield. Then each player who searched the library for this way shuffles it. So that's where the Tempting Offer comes in. You're going to obviously get to search your library for land and put it onto the battlefield. Your opponents do as well, but if for each one that does it, you get an additional search as well. Slice in Twain. So an instant, destroy target artifact or enchantment, and it's a replacement effect as well. You get to draw a card. With Harmonise, you get to draw 3 cards for 2 colourless, 2 green. From the Ashes, this is sorcery speed. It destroys all non-basic lands. For each land destroyed this way, its controller may search his or her library for a basic land card and put it onto the battlefield. Then each player who searches his or her library this way shuffles their library. We've got Wrath of God here, so we've got mass removal for creatures. It destroys all creatures and they can't be regenerated. Rain of Thorns, another modal spell where we get to choose something. Choose one or more, destroy target artifact, destroy target enchantment, and or destroy target land, and that's 4 colourless, 2 green. 1 dozen eyes, another modal spell. Choose one, put a 5/5 green beast creature token onto the battlefield, so again synergy with beasts and tokens. Or put 5 1/1 green insect creature tokens onto the battlefield. It's Entwine on it. So for 3 green we can choose both if you pay the Entwine cost. Slice and Dice. So 4 colourless, 2 red. Slice and Dice deals 4 damage to each creature. It's got cycling on it as well, so another card with cycling. 2 and a red, we can get to discard the card and draw a card. When you cycle Slice and Dice, you may have it deal 1 damage to each creature. Fireball, so now we're moving on up to our X and something spells. So with Fireball for X and a red, It deals X damage divided evenly rounded down among any number of target creatures and or players. Fireball costs 1 colourless mortar cast for each target beyond the first. Street Spasm, again X and red, it's an instant. Remember, Fireball's only sorcery speed, but Street Spasm is an instant. Street Spasm deals X damage to target creature without flying, you don't control, and for its overload cost of 2X and 2 red, you may cast this spell for its overload cost. If you do, change its text by replacing all instances of target with each. So in this case it would say Street Spasm deals X damage to each creature without flying, you don't control. And finally, another X spell, Savage Twister, X red green. This is a sorcery. Savage Twister deals X damage to each creature. So there's some very useful scalable spells there that are going to be good if you've got plenty of surplus mana further on in the game to expend into that and do serious amounts of damage. Okay, so that's the analysis of the deck, nature of the beast. Thanks for watching.